So let's go ahead and start the morning. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk, I walk around a little bit, partially because I'm still drunk from last night. But we're going to talk about upgrading your legacy platform without stopping the world. Real quick, huge thank you to NgTalks. This has been an amazing conference so far. I'm really looking forward to the second day, and I'm excited to be a part of it. Selfishly, I also did have myself in the picture, right there, just in case. People know that I actually did show up here. A little bit about myself, like Dima said, I'm actually a principal architect at Ultimate Software. What that means is I look at other people code and watch YouTube all day. Not in reality, but that's what people think. A lot of stuff that I do has to deal with how do you bring a very large enterprise together and help people to be able to work together more cohesively. This year, actually, I also became a Google Developer Expert for Angular. Dima was actually the same month we were brought into the GDE program. I'm also the founder of another conference, which Dima was a speaker, the NG Atlanta conference. Real quick, something about that conference is actually 65% of our speakers last year were women in technology. So Dima and I both share a passion for helping women to get into this industry. I also discovered Telegram, so if all of you have Telegram, you can find me on there. I have lots of stickers now, that's a thing. I'm also on LinkedIn, Stack Overflow, GitHub, obviously. Most of my stuff is on Twitter. So he said wrestling. That's me, right there. That's last week. So I'm actually preparing for a tournament in October, which he mentioned is the Fat and Ball Classic. Another fun fact, that's my two boys right there. Last night was fun. I discovered Ukraine is amazing, but there's one problem. $16 shots of Samagong. I need water. Some people know. Okay, so getting serious now. So let's get into a real brief history of the web. Who remembers? Come on. jQuery. It was great, right? You know, it came out in 2006. $sign was one of the things that helped revolutionize the web, right? You know, I didn't have to do, document, get my ID, all that craziness anymore. Now I can just do $sign and a class selector, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. And then Knockout. Anybody here use Knockout? Fantastic. So Knockout was the first model view model web framework that came out, and for the first time, like, data binding was easy, right? You were able to bind data to your page, you were able to structure your models. All the people that were doing Java were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And that happened in 2010, but something else happened in 2010. AngularJS came out. And the Angular team had a vision for, how do we bring MVC to the browser in a holistic picture? And we'll get more into that later. But then something horrible happened, and everything else existed. No, joking. It's actually been interesting because if you look at the JavaScript ecosystem has really exploded, right? And now we have a plethora of choices to choose from. Part of that is also Angular. So one of the things to think about is as time progresses, our applications start to look dated, and we were like, what do I want to do with this? Right? Should I upgrade this? Should I leave it alone? Customers are still using it, but what do we do, right? Should we look at, do I only upgrade when there's a security concern? How about when the website's slow? You heard people yesterday talking about performance and how important performance is and how people will bounce from your website if it's too slow, right? If a sticker takes too long to load, I ain't gonna look at that. Is there bugs, right? Is it a bug that keeps people from being able to exercise the functionality of my site, or is it something that's just annoying? Is there some unforeseen costs if I don't upgrade, right? So if I don't keep up, are other things gonna become harder for me in the future? How hard is it for me to get support from the companies that are creating that software. So if you think about jQuery, for example, if I stay on the old school jQuery that's not even supported by the jQuery Foundation anymore, how am I going to be able to get help with that when I run into an issue later on? How easy is it to find developers? Or how easy to develop it, right? You know, if you're looking at, I use Dojo, does anyone here ever done Dojo? Two dudes, right? The likelihood of you being able to find people that use that technology because you're not progressing becomes significantly harder the longer you wait. And that gets to the availability of talent. But then also, like, you come to a conference like this, and if you're not using Angular, like, this Angular thing's amazing, it's shiny, I want to use it, right? But does that mean you need to upgrade right now? Sometimes we look at our code, and Dima has this feeling about my code, just make it stop. Like, you don't want to be sitting there and looking at it and saying, why do I have to pull another story to work on this incredibly hard application to work on? Why can't I use this new technology that I learned at the last conference? And what do I need to do to make that pain stop? And sometimes you just want to rage quit because it is so hard to get done the thing that you want to get done. But there is a way forward. And the first question to get to that way forward is, do we stop the world? Right? And what I mean by that is, if you have an application, you want to bring it forward, do you stop all development on that application and then start again? But then your customers, they don't see that value, right? They're going to have to wait to see what it is you're working on. Maybe you want to develop in parallel, but then you end up in this scenario. And it gets worse over time because the other team is still working as you're trying to redo their work, right? So when does it end? Does it ever end? And maybe we could just do incremental upgrades because, you know, that's easy and fine. So where do we actually begin, right? And in my opinion, I think it begins with a design language system. Defining your interactions for your application, the look and feel that you want to get to, and the messaging and the reason behind that, right? Because everything that we do should be with intention, and your design system should also be with intention. And a big part of that comes down to why, and this slide's broken, I'm sorry. Part of that is about recognizability. Does everyone here have Facebook? Or know what Facebook is, at least? Okay, good. That like button, everyone knows what that is, even if you don't have Facebook. That's part of their branding, that's part of their recognizability. Consistency, right? How many websites in an enterprise look like that? You have 50 kinds of buttons. What button am I using on which page, right? That becomes really challenging to develop in because now you can't even think about that. I just have this button. I need to be able to move forward, but no, I got to use the button for this page that's written in, you know, this really crazy technology, and it becomes challenging, right? And your customers don't like that because they have a disparate experience. They're not able to see, okay, I'm in one brand because maybe you acquired another company and you try to bring them together, but they have completely different branding. Like, that doesn't feel like one product, right? You've all gone to a website where you start the experience and then you move on, and it's a completely different experience, and you're still with the same company. Like, what's the deal with that? You know, that's partially because they haven't brought that forward. They haven't brought that consistency. I'm just gonna skip that one. If you look at, like, so, material design. We saw material design, we saw Ionic, we talked about, Valor actually created NGX Bootstrap, which is my favorite Bootstrap wrapper for Angular. There's a really good question of, should you wrap those components or shouldn't you wrap those components? And if you do, why are you doing it, right? So something to think about is developer experience. So if you have 500 developers, there's not that many here, but there's like 400 developers here maybe. If I had to get all of you to do the same thing, Would it be easier for me to document, sometimes you use this, sometimes you use this, and when you use it, depends? Or is it better for me to then wrap those components in something that is common and let that system understand when you should do something? Right, so that's something you need to think about, because you have to think about the other people, because a lot of people fall into the trap of developing for themselves. Well, I understand when I should use those things. My friends understand when I should use those things, but there's 400 of us here. It doesn't scale to have to rely on that tribal knowledge to understand those little idiosyncrasies. The other question is, how do you get this out to the world? You've created this design language within your organization. How do people consume it? Right? Do you want people to be on a specific version of it because maybe your application is something that is critical and you can never have it go down, you can never have a defect, so you have to be very locked in on your versions when you deploy? Or do you allow yourself to be evergreen? The next question you have to ask is, do I only support Angular? Right? You saw yesterday about Angular Elements. And the really interesting thing about Angular Elements is now we have the ability to support other platforms easily. So you have applications that are using jQuery, you have applications that are using Knockout, you have applications that are using Dojo or React. With the promise of Angular Elements, I can create my design system once and share it with the entire organization. And then the next question to ask yourself is, should we work within a monorepo or should we work in a distributed environment? A lot of that comes down to, how do you want to evolve your teams? The thing to think about, especially when you're upgrading your legacy application, is a lot of these people have never worked in the technology that you're about to show them. Right? A lot of these people have never worked in the methodologies that you're about to show them. One of my past employers, they were using TeamCity, they were using SVN, and anytime you'd make a change, the entire world will come down your machine, and then you have to make your change, and then you ship it up, and 6 months later, that goes into production. And then this other team started using Git, and they're like, oh, this is amazing. We could do continuous delivery, we could do continuous deployment. And that's a completely different methodology. That's a completely different mind shift. And you have to make sure that you're helping those teams to be able to come along. And you're wondering, like, how does this help me upgrade my legacy application? Part of it is the coaching that you're going to have to do with those people to help them understand the philosophical differences with what it is we're doing. So there's two major systems. This is incredibly oversimplified. But there's two major systems that I'm going to talk about. And one being the monolith, right? So this is, .NET, code behind, web forms, no APIs, nothing. And it's connected to its own, SQL database. And then you have a SPA over here that's used Angular, and it's got, Auth0, it's got a couple of Node APIs, and each of those APIs are tied to their own database. So that's our SPA. How do you bring these two together? How do you make it so a customer can go from one to the other without knowing any difference? Part of that is by allowing it to evolve. And some systems are able to do this. Not every system can do this, but this is something that I've been successful with in the past. Is you actually start by doing a couple things. The first thing you do is you create an API gateway, right? When you have a single point for all of your APIs to flow through, everything becomes significantly easier. But you're going to say, my monolith doesn't have any APIs. Fine. You're still developing on that monolith, right? As you add things to that, extract them as services, you can still tie them to the same database. Maybe you have to use .NET Web APIs or .NET Core, right? And you tie it to the same database. That's fine, whatever. But extract those as services and allow them to run through Auth and allow them to run through the API gateway. And by doing that, you've actually begun to decouple your UI from the monolith, right? So that's why the UI is slowly starting to get pulled out of the monolith. And then what's also interesting is you have this Docker container over here that's holding your Angular application, that's going through auth and the API gateway to get to your microservices. So now you're able to present a single interface to the user. And now that you have that, you can begin to use that DLS to bring those experiences together. And then you could also start to pick pages up and move them from here to here. And customers won't know the difference. They're not having to sign in again. They look at the exact same application. All of a sudden it gets a little bit faster, right? All of a sudden it gets a little bit lighter. And slowly, you've eaten the elephant. But sometimes there's problems, right? Sometimes I'm part of that problem. There's actually a shirt that you might have seen Sergi wearing yesterday. Because there's a story behind this that Dima shared a little bit about, where I had a demo for leadership, right? And QA had already gone home. And I'm like, but I have this demo, and there's all these amazing features that are PRs. Some of them are tested and failed. Some of them aren't tested. But they look good to me, so I'm just going to merge them all. So I merged, I think, 9 or 10 pull requests in the master and said, this is fine. And the demo went fantastic. The rest of the application was broken, but the demo went fantastic. But how do you guard yourself against me, right? If you think about this picture again, how do you begin to do things in an incremental way and protect against that when you're in a single spa, right? You may have teams of 10 to 50 to 100 people working on this spa. How do you keep them from being Zack and merging and breaking your application? This is a little bit complicated, but one of the things to think about is how can you break those changes down, make them more digestible, and get them out to the world in a way that is safer, right? And in the case of a DLS, that's really important. Excuse me. Because if the DLS design language, the entirety of your organization relies on that. So you think about, I have to update a component. What happens to that component? Okay, well now it's going to go to my monorepo, because in this version I'm making the assumption that you're on a monorepo. You have to be cognizant of all of the downstream applications and how that's going to be affected, right? So your system's going to publish downstream. It's going to kick out a new version of your component library, your DLS site. Hopefully you have something that publishes the sketch. But something to think about is who's actually going to handle those changes? So a really good example is the button changes on your screen. The height of your button changes. Who's responsible for upgrading that button across your application? Is it your design team? Is it all the other teams that you work with? And if you think about that for a little bit, that's really important as you do your upgrades, because each little change that you make has an impact on the application as a whole and the drag that you create, right? So if you've pulled a card that says, oh, we need to change the height, you've now taken away from the business value that you're creating for your customers to change the height of a button, right? So we get back to this on the slide a little bit. Okay, how do I begin to extract and evolve things in such a way that I can take that cost and spread it across the organization as a whole? It's almost done. So the other thing to talk about is that sometimes you need to work for companies that are, for people that don't have that monorepo. I actually have the off to the side here that goes a little bit off the edge. What you can begin to do is publish things in such a way that you can do versioning within your spa. You saw yesterday that we had modules. You could pull in modules. Something that Dima actually has a tool, I forget what it's called now, where you can actually take a module, compile it in AOT, and then you would bring that back into your application. A lot of the folks that worked with me on some projects have done that before. And you could still pull that into the SPA, but now it's versioned, right? So when Zack breaks something, that's okay, because all I did was break our continuous deployment environment. What's in production is a pinned version of what it is that we are working on. So now what you could say is, okay, well this team has a new release. Okay, great. Upgrade their version in the mono repo, upgrade their version in the SPA, do a deployment, everyone else stays exactly the same. So now you've decoupled your teams, you've decoupled your architecture, and you're able to move forward at the velocity of your individual teams. Those lights are going ham right now. So you've been able to decouple all of these things, and now you can evolve and move forward. I don't know why they're flashing at me. I have 7 minutes. So now that you've decoupled, your teams can move forward, and that's a really powerful thing, right? Now your teams can continue to work, continue to evolve, and you can train them, you can evolve things, you can move to different levels of code sharing. You can say, you know what, we're going to extract this piece, and now everyone's going to begin to reuse this shared module. But you could do all of that without having to disrupt your customer, right? You don't have to wait and not provide them value for all this time, and you don't have to have them regress because you've done this decoupling, because you've done all these things. So that's an interesting journey to think about. It's like, there's not really a hard set answer on how to make this successful, right? A lot of it depends on your exact infrastructure. A lot of it depends on if you're even able to do some of these things. But there are things to think about and things to think about for possibilities of what would happen if I could knock this off? What would happen if I could slowly start to pull this out and bring it over here? And how would that affect my customer? Because at the end of the day, that's really what's most important. Anyway. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, especially the Velour software, for putting this on, for putting up with me, and for really creating an amazing event. Thank you.